Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, welcome to our February live stream. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Ahlan wa sahlan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu salam ala khatir anbiya Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali ashabi ajma'in. I'm so happy to have you all here, and I'm mostly so happy to be doing this particular live stream in February. We at Rabata, since January, have been working hard to think about how can we together work together to make our mission statement positive cultural change. And the struggle to make positive cultural change is something that we need to think about, and we need to be academic about it, and we also need to be realistic, and we also need to be energetic, really. So the live stream today of Black History Matters, that particular hashtag, Black History Matters, is really important to me and dear to my heart. So that is what we're talking about today, and I welcome you all to this space. And the way we run this space, if you're new, is you have a chat box and you can chat and you can talk to me, or you can wait till the end, or you can raise your hand, or however you want. This is an interactive space, sort of like a town square where we are talking with one another. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, salatu salam ala khatir anbiya Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali ashabi ajma'in. The title Black History Matters is a title that my daughter yesterday challenged me about. She said, "Mama, what right do you have to talk about Black History Matters?" I was a little offended. But it made me think about that concept and the binary that we are dealing with in the wider society. And it made me really focus on what we want to talk about today. And what I want to talk about today is, where are we when we as Muslims consider our history? Where are we in recognizing the importance of Black history as well? And I would say that we get a grade of about a D-. And I think I'm being generous with that D-. We could possibly easily take a failing grade. And I say that because as an ummah, we don't recognize, as a wider ummah, we don't recognize the importance of the history of Africa as a continent in the larger history of the Islamic world. We don't. And today, culturally, as a result of post-colonialism, we have judgments about shades of skin color. We judge that lighter skin colors are somehow more attractive and darker skin colors are less attractive in general in our cultures. And this is not a fun thing to talk about. And I know when I first became a Muslim, I was told that there is no difference between anyone of any race except for by taqwa. And I was also told that men and women in Islam have experienced real equity. And both of these statements are true at the foundation of our faith, and both are false in the cultural manifestation of our faith. And as Muslims, we need to take it seriously and think about, first of all, we need to think about the foundation of our history. We need to change the master narrative. When I started out in my doctoral program, we started out by exploring the master narrative in the United States. And it was a lot of work because it was a doctoral level exploration of that master narrative. And the entire time that I was digging deeply into the concept of the master narrative of the Western world, I was contemplating and thinking about what is our master narrative as Muslims. And for those of you who are not quite sure what a master narrative is, a master narrative is the dominant story that we tell. It's the dominant story that we tell. And we have a dominant story that we tell. And we tell it in our schools and in our curriculum programs and in our mosques and in our weekend schools and in our khutbahs and in our weekly lessons. And much of that story, in our dominant story, much of it is true, to be sure. But there are overlying falsehoods that we are telling as well. And regarding Black history, one of the falsehoods we tell is that we imply, when we give the life stories of the companions of the Prophet, we imply that the only Black Muslim was Bilal. This is an implication. And I would be interested to hear from you. You can go ahead and chat in the box. If you also, as a younger Muslim or child, had that experience, this idea that the only Black Muslim is, in the time of the Prophet was Bilal. And for me, as I grew in knowledge and as I grew in study, I didn't find places that pointed out and recognized the large numbers of Black Muslims that we have in our seerah. Now, why didn't I recognize that? There are a couple of reasons. First of all, in the early narrations, we don't emphasize, the early narrators didn't emphasize the variations of skin color. And they didn't do that because the experience of skin color at that time was not the same experience of skin color that we have today. So we need to recognize that, first of all. However, in seeing the experience of skin color that Muslims around the world have today, it is important as educators and mothers and those and imams and anyone who is teaching the community to go back in our history and clarify the rich history of Black Muslims. And first of all, we begin with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And by the way, just let me give a caveat here. This live stream is called Black History Matters. It's not called Black History. I wouldn't presume to give a 1-hour live stream about the rich and varied and expansive history of Black people around the world. But this is about Black History Matters. So at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were a number of Black people that were supportive of the Prophet ﷺ, important companions, not only Bilal, Zayd ibn Haritha, for example, Ayman. Now, of course, you know that I am very interested in women and the women around the Prophet ﷺ. And Ayman is a very important woman because she cared for the Prophet in his childhood, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And later, Zayd ibn Haritha, who was the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ, will marry her in what I see as an imitation of his beloved, that he loved the Prophet ﷺ so much. The Prophet ﷺ had married a woman 15 years his senior. And Zayd then does something similar, although I believe Ayman was 17 to 19 years his senior, if not more. Excuse me. And there is a story that we don't tell. We don't tell it. We tell the story, but we don't remind our children that our history is filled with people of color. It's not a white person's history. I saw a joke on Twitter this morning, a cartoon, or maybe I saw it on WhatsApp, where they have the Buddha very thin, and he's saying to Jesus, he's saying, oh, I should have had in my will, a disclaimer and made sure people never depicted me as fat. And Jesus answers and said, well, I've been depicted as a white, blue-eyed man for centuries. So what I'm talking about here is taking back our history. Taking back our history, and our book covers and our famous people and the people that our children look up to should be filled with the true colors of our history. Now, when we're talking about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, I already mentioned, we're talking about really changing the perception that the only black Muslim was Bilal. And I am personally frustrated by that, because one of the reasons that it was easy perhaps in the post-colonial world one of the reasons that perhaps in the post-colonial world that there has been an emphasis on Bilal is because he was clearly a slave. And while I personally have a very close affinity to Bilal, and I have myself made much dua that, like Bilal was given the job of calling people to prayer, that I would be given the job of calling people to prayer. It is an unfair estimation of who we are that only one of our Muslims was black, and it's also an unfair estimation that the only slave was a black man. Many of the early Muslims were slaves. Many of the early Muslims were slaves. Salman al-Farisi, yes, but also many others of Arab origin. Suhaib is a person who was reddy colored. He was very white, and he was a slave. So we need to get away from the colonialist attitude of history, and we need to take back our history. And I would say we need to do more. Oftentimes when we talk like this, we say we need to return to the early way of presenting history. I would say no, that the early way of presenting history was contextual for that time. It did not emphasize race or skin color or even gender in appropriate ways, because at that time it was a different context. We could say it wasn't necessary, or if we don't say it wasn't necessary, we can say they didn't have the understanding of the necessity. And later in their later now in our post-colonial era, we need to take this seriously. And we need to rewrite and represent Islamic history. If we move forward after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the way we generally study history is through something called the Mujaddideen. Now, we have a class at Ribat called the Mujaddideen and Crisis and Cures in Islamic History. And the book that we're using is called Saviors of Islam. And if you look through that book, it's all about Arabs. Now, the person who wrote the book is Indian. And actually his first book that he wrote was a 4-volume set that included who he thought were the Mujaddids of India at length. He has lengthy discussions about them. The rewrite, the new one that has the first volume, is only about Arabs. Arabs are important in our history, to be sure. But is it possible that in a world where only 20% of our Muslims today in 2016 are Arab, is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who promises to preserve our faith, is it possible that when the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send someone, man yujaddid dinakum, to renew our faith, to renew or revive our religion, that he meant white men? Arabs have to check the box white, when they're as Arabs. Is it possible that for all around, certainly not. We all know that that's ridiculous, actually. It's ridiculous. So why don't our history books look to Africa? There is much conjecture, I should say, or not conjecture, that has a negative connotation. There is much thought that Osman Dan Fodio was a mujaddid. As a matter of fact, his followers and those who write about him believe he was a mujaddid. We, as Muslims, need to bring his story into our Islamic curriculum. We need to bring his story into the curriculum programs that our children are listening to and studying. It is not okay that when they look at history, they don't look at how did Islam enter Africa? How did Islam grow in Africa? Some of the greatest, most spiritual stories of Islamic growth are in Africa. Osman Dan Fodio was an 18th century leader. And those who study Tajdeed, when they look around at that time, and they really struggle to look for someone who carries the flag of Tajdeed. Now, I will add to this a layer and say that it is men who are looking at Osman Dan Fodio and thinking that perhaps he was the Mujaddid. I think that if we look with a little bit of a wider lens, we may be able to see that perhaps it was his daughter, Nana Asma'u, who was the Mujaddidah. Who was the Mujaddidah of that time. Because her work will carry through until today. So, Black history matters. And our schools are not addressing it. Our books are not addressing it. Our mosques in 1965, with the Immigration Act of the United States, when we had numbers of Muslims coming to the United States from India and the Arab world, we had many, many mosques open. But in 1968, the Black American Muslim movement was entrenched still quite a bit in the Nation of Islam. And the immigrants didn't know how. We will give them a pass here and forgive them. They didn't know how to mix with that movement. And perhaps the Black American movement didn't know how to mix with the immigrants. In 2016, I can give them a pass, but I absolutely cannot give them a pass today in 2016. What I mean is, from sitting in my chair in 2016, I can look back and say in 1965, in 1970, in 1975, I'll give them a pass. I'll give them a pass because I wasn't there. But today in 2016, we don't have a pass anymore. We absolutely don't have a pass anymore. And had we done a better job in keeping racism out of our communities, in sticking to original attitudes of taqwa, in recognizing the post-colonial effects on our community, had we done a better job, our mosques would reflect America better. The best and most beautiful mosques in the United States. I stand by this based on everything I've seen. The best and friendliest and most open mosques in the United States are the mosques run by the Warith Deen Muhammad movement. Period. End of story. They have the best community activities. They feed people. They're involved in the communities around them. They have excellent programming. Their khutbahs are relative and about the people in the room. The social services they have are positive, and their gender attitudes are up to date with both Islam and open-minded, non-colonialist thinking. So we need to learn. We need to learn from one another. It's a great tragedy because the Arab and Desi and Asian community in the United States has a lot to offer the Black American community if we could get together. if we could get together. There's language, there's Quran reading, there's tajweed, there's experience, there's a rich history of experience in Islam. But we have to get over the hump of, does Black history matter or not? I believe that every Muslim in every Muslim school should learn about the history of Islam in America. And that should not be just, slaves came from Africa to America as Muslims. Because it's more than that. That's very important. It's very important. And many of those slaves were great scholars. And that we don't teach them. We teach them as though they were born as slaves and they were brought here. We are not teaching our children that Black history matters. We're teaching them that Arab history is up here, Indo-Pak history is here, and Black history is down here. This is fundamentally not only wrong, but a community sin. We have in fiqh a concept called fard al-kifaya or fard al-ayn and fard al-kifaya. Now, fard al-ayn means that it's fard on you and me. So I have to pray, you have to pray. This is a fard upon me. Absolutely, you don't get out of that one. Okay, fard al-kifaya is a fard for a community. It's an obligation upon a community. And this obligation upon the community is the following. If the community is in need of something, then it is an obligation upon every member of the community to fulfill that obligation until it is fulfilled by someone or someone's. It is an obligation. It is a fard kifaya right now upon our community to write and develop curricula for our children, our young people, and our adults that present Muslims that change the rhetoric, that demonstrate the importance of Black history, that talk about Black history, Muslim Black history, as what it was. Wallahi, I swear to you, if you were to study the history of Islam in Africa, you would be ashamed that you didn't know it before. Some of our best examples of humanity come from Africa. Some of our best examples of gender equality in our religion come from Africa. Some of the best examples of true effort for this faith come from Africa. But we don't know them. We don't know them. Malcolm X is a modern person whose reputation has been smeared in the wider culture, in the wider community. And Muslims buy this. We look up to Malcolm X. We think he's cool. But do we really know what he was talking about? Do you know? You don't. I know you don't. Maybe one or two of you do. But in general, we don't know. We don't know what his message was because we're not reading, because we weren't taught, and because we're not teaching. Why don't we have halaqas where we learn what were the words of Malcolm X? What did he teach? You know, one of the greatest teachings of Malcolm X? It was the importance of social justice work in the context of taqwa and tawheed. Do you know that? You don't know that. We have been taught a binary that we believe. We've been taught the binary that Martin Luther King was the spiritual head of the civil rights movement and the peace-loving man. And we have been taught that Martin Luther King was an outsider, was a violent man, was someone to avoid. Neither is true. Martin Luther King recognized the need for death and capitalized upon it when it happened. I'm not criticizing him. I'm saying he was a person who pushed nonviolence and taught people nonviolence and did a good job with that, but recognized that when violence occurred, he needed to capitalize upon it to further the movement. And Malcolm X was against violence instigated. He was only about defending yourself when and if you were attacked. We don't know these things. The community doesn't know these things. And Malcolm X is a very important person for us. Was he a mujaddid? I'm not saying he was, but I'm not saying he wasn't. Was Malcolm X a mujaddid that we as a Muslim community haven't even looked at because he was a black Muslim? Because he was an American black Muslim? Even scarier. The world of the world of history is a complicated world. And it's a simple world. The historian, if we can talk about history just for a minute, the study of history. The historian is supposed to be neutral. You are to look at patterns and artifacts, letters, for example, lectures, speeches, and tell the story of what happened without cultural judgment or assessment. That's a historian. But certainly there is a judgment when we are silent. When we don't tell history, that is a judgment. When we don't tell history, it says it's not important. It says it's not important. And we are raising a new generation of Muslims. And we are raising ourselves. And we need to change that. We need to recognize that our history is rich around the world and especially in Africa. And we need to demand those stories and we need to research them and write them ourselves. I have a book for you that I'm going to recommend. It's called The African Caliphate: The Life, Works, and Teachings of Sheikh Osman Danfodio. And by the way, while I'm telling you, this, and there's a comment, an important comment. I was going to talk about this, but I will talk about it now, which is the narratives of African American communities that were not Nation of Islam or Worthy Muhammad, and were all the way back to the 60s or earlier. And we do have pictures of such groups of people, and we need to recognize them and bring them in. My point is that we need to discover this history and talk about it. We need to talk about it and make it matter. Just while I'm talking about the book, let me also say that we have a 20% sale at Daybreak right now, because I want you to learn this. I want you, I didn't do that very well. Maybe someone can fix it. We have, I think, every speech Malcolm X has ever spoken. We have books about we have this book, The African Caliphate, and we have books about Nana Isma'u, and we have books written by Colin West. We have books about Black history that is not Muslim history as well, which is also very important. All Black history is important because it all works together. Just like the history of peoples are important because it all works together. If we knew better, the history of the Arab world, and if we all understood Sykes-Picot and we understood these things, we would have interacted with post-colonialism in a healthier way. And so our history is important, period. But at Daybreak, we want you to learn this material. So we are calling on you to buy these books. We have a whole bunch of books there, 20% off, and you have to put in the Black History Matters code. Okay, that's what that says there. Maybe one of my lovely admins could put that in so it's readable. I put it in a very messy way there. If you could put it in so it's readable, it would be better for people. Let me give you a few just treats. I wanted to share one thing about Usman Dan Fodio because I wanted to talk to you about what it means when we study African history. You all know that issues of social justice are very important to me, and especially I'm concerned with the history of women and the place of Muslim women in our Muslim societies. When we look at Arab history, sometimes we get depressed. Sometimes we get depressed and we think, When we go to Africa in the 18th century, when colonialism was having a heavy effect on our Arab countries and on India, at this point, it was not yet in the area of Africa that Usman Dan Fodio is from, the Sokoto Khalifa. And we see that his work, much of it had to do with women. This is why I wonder if it wasn't Nana Ismail. But we're not going to argue that issue here. We'll argue that issue in the Mujaddideen class, which if you want to sign up for, we've only had one class and it's late registration, but registration is still open. The work of Usman Dan Fodio was the work of a person who looked and recognized that one of the greatest problems of his society was the intellectual war, in which one of the greatest issues he was dealing with was the issue of women's attendance in lessons and the education of women. I am looking for a particular quote I wanted to here. He said that it is obligatory on a woman to acquire full knowledge of her religious obligations. If her husband is not able to supply this knowledge, she is under an Islamic obligation to go out and search for it. If he refuses her this permission, she should go out without his permission, and no blame is attached to her, nor does she incur any sin by doing that. I want to remind you that this is 18th century Africa. Knowledge is superior to maintenance, he says. Maintenance meaning giving her food and providing a lifestyle is less important than providing an education, according to Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. This is forward thinking, and this is something that when we read it, our hearts are opened and we recognize the truth of Islam in the work of a man in Africa. Safiya is asking me, isn't it true that Arab Muslims didn't get so misogynistic and racist until heavy influences of the Byzantine and Persian conversion? Yes, Safiya, that it is true that had a great effect on them, but also the early Jahiliyyah of Arabs was misogynist to a great degree, and so it was easy to fall back in, and that was early that began to happen. And my point is not that early Muslims were misogynist. My point is that as we go forward in our history, we are limiting ourselves when we assume that our only history is the history of the Arab world. That's my point. That we have to be excited and respectful and have great effort to learn the histories of all Muslim peoples, and especially today I am talking about the Black history, which is the history of Islam in Africa and how it spread, the history of the great leaders of Africa, which includes one of my favorite early leaders, Nana Ismail, and her father, Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio, and includes the great people of, I can't remember their name right now, it slipped my mind. I've forgotten their name, but it was a group of early Muslims in West Africa who did great work in both in dawah and in helping the people. The great beginning of Timbuktu, the university, the early university that we don't talk about. We only talk about Al-Azhar. What about Timbuktu, which was the first and greatest university ever, and it was in Africa. So the world that we are looking at today in 2016 is a world of racism. We've got hashtag Black Lives Matter, which obviously Black History Matters is a play on that phrase. And we have Donald Trump, and we have so much hate. And we as Muslims need to be sure that we clean house. If we are going to be the people who enjoin right, enjoin all that is beautiful and shun all that is ugly, we need to clean house. We need to rid our communities of racism. And we can do that by teaching. Just bring into our curricular programs the works of early African leaders, Black American Muslims and the history of Islam in America, Black American Muslims today that are working hard, the role of people of color, Black people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't only Bilal. And we need to do all of this as a fard kifaya. We need to do this as an obligation for the education of our ummah, so that our ummah can stand up and stand with. We need to stand with the social justice issues that are around us. We need to stop being so insular and only caring about our own issues. We need to stand up and stand with the issues of the people around us, because that's the right thing to do. Not because we hope for they will stand with us later. Because that is the absolute right thing to do. Okay? I want you to go. I want you to now, let's have some action steps. Let's have action steps. Action step number 1 is personal. Educate yourself. Take that discount code and buy yourself Malcolm X's speeches and read them. Watch them on YouTube. Read about the Sokoto Khalifa. Read about Nana Asma'u. Attend our class next fall, Islam in America, which talks a lot about the Black American Muslim movements. Read, learn, educate yourself. That's action step number 1, and it's important because then you have something to say and something to do. Action step number 2, find someone who will write a book, or you write a book. Write a storybook, literature fiction that has as its main characters Black Muslims. Write a creative nonfiction book about history. Write a storybook that can be a supplement to learning in Islamic schools. If you have an educational background, and if you know someone who does, and you have money, then hire them to write a new Islamic studies curriculum that includes people of color and women. Let me footnote that as well. Get a team and write it yourself, or fundraise to get it done and then get a team. Or if you go to your Islamic school, number 3, go to your Islamic school in your community and bring in storybooks about people of color. As much as you can about Black Muslims, but even non-Muslims you need to bring in. Storybooks about people of color, and work hard to get that done. Number 4, work with Muslim Anti-Racism Committee. They have khutbahs that you can give to your imam. And if you give it to your imam again and again and again and again and again, I believe he will begin to want to work with it. Number 3, get on the board of directors. Number 5, get on the board of directors at your mosque. Lobby to get on that board of directors, or lobby them. So when we say that our board of directors don't support this in our Muslim schools and mosques, we have to, before we say that, step back and say, how hard have we worked to make this happen? And have we worked to make this happen in a way that works with people where they are? We have to go to people where they are. We can't expect them to be where we are. So we call them for tea. We call them for cake, dinner. And during dinner, we have a plan. We don't say, you need to be talking about Black American history, because they don't know it. They don't know how to do it. You have a plan, or you offer yourself. I will come and talk. Or I know someone who will come and speak. Here are 5 khutbahs for the imam. Here are the books we can use in our school. So get on the board of directors or become friends with the board of directors and get that mosque to work harder. If you have an imam already, lobby to have a substitute imam. If your imam is not Black, lobby to have a substitute imam who is Black. Maybe that person is just a volunteer from the community, but nonetheless, the children are seeing him in front of them. If we don't have enough Black imams in the community and you know Quran, then open up a class and start teaching that class, and go to the African American, the Black American mosques in your community and teach Quran. I can't emphasize that enough. This is number 6. Go, if you are in an immigrant mosque, go to the African American mosque, the Black Muslim mosque, the places that are populated with Black people, and say, I will teach Quran here. And if they don't accept you right away, that's because they don't know you. Start attending some of their things and offer to teach. Offer to teach the children. Raise a generation of Black Americans who are hafizat or hafizin al-Quran. Don't be a savior, be a helper. I like that phrase. And we have a suggestion as well that local MSAs are great partners for initiatives. So get involved with your MSA. Are you feeling too old for your MSA? Every student in the world wants to be fed. Offer them dinner. Offer them dinner and then offer them ideas and support for their ideas. Let them take the lead, but you be on that back burner helping them do good things. And maybe help them maybe if you help them build a workshop, you can then bring them into a mosque and into mosques around the area to give their workshop. All of our parents like to see our youth doing activities. And number 6, write a play. Be in a play. Build a monologue program. Do something cultural. Number 6, that was. Do something cultural to help build the way we view Black history. This is February, guys. Put this on project level. Make this your Valentine. Show your love for this ummah. From now until the end of the month, put this on project level and see what you can do. See what you can do. I know it's only 2 weeks, but see what you can do. Absolutely. You can suggest a book. And also, may I remind you all and suggest that I was actually going to do the live stream this morning from daybreak so that I could show you the books, but it's very cold in Minnesota, so I changed my mind. The work of this kind of work goes on forever, but if you put it on project level for 2 weeks, it will begin. Changes will begin, and you'll see where you fit, and you'll see what you can do. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and give you the energy that you need to make real changes in your community. Let's review our action steps. Thank you, Tanuke, for that book suggestion. Let's review our action steps. Number 1, educate. Educate yourself. Number 2, write. 1, educate. 2, write. Now, when you're writing, you can write or you can encourage someone to write. 3, donate storybooks of people of color to your local Islamic school. Educate, write, donate. We have some at daybreak. 4, work with Muslim Anti-Racism Committee because they have khutbahs. So give khutbahs to your imams. Educate, write, donate. Work with MARC, Mark. 5, get political. Get political. Get on your board of directors or lobby them. Lobby them for the work that needs to be done. Let's do them again. Educate, write, donate, work with Muslim Anti-Racism Committee. Work with Mark, get political. Number 6, do something cultural. Get cultural. Write a play, start a play, bring in music, something that show them the music of African Muslims that are singing nasheed. We always have Arabs singing nasheed. Show them African Muslims singing nasheed. Educate, write, donate, work with Mark, get political, get cultural. There's another resource from Hazel. Get cultural. And number 7 is go deeply within yourself and question your own possible racism, your own possible prejudice, and make the decision to change that. Make the decision to get away from self-hatred, from community racism, from silence. Make the decision to get away from silence. Inshallah. All right, should we do them one more? There are 7. Educate, write, donate, work with Mark, get political, get cultural, and stop the silence. Stop the silence, number 7. Thank you, Iman. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Be sure to go to Daybreak and order some of those books. I really highly recommend the books we have that are speeches of Malcolm X because they're just speeches. And you get to read his words as they were. Read his words as they were. Buy a gift. Buy gifts for your local mosque. Buy gifts for the children and your family. Make a once-a-week halaqah where you read a speech of Malcolm X. We're going to do that in our family. We're gonna read a speech of Malcolm X once a week, at least till the end of this month, and maybe we'll go further with that. Thank you very much, everyone. And Assalamu alaikum. Have a wonderful day. And don't forget to get books from Daybreak. And sign up for the Mujaddideen class where we will be making a decision. Was Osman Dan Fodio or Nana Asma'u a Mujaddid or Mujaddida? Assalamu alaikum.